WoW has hundreds of different kinds of races, and a fair few of them are playable, especially with Battle for Azeroth adding 10 of them, equal to every prior expansion times 2. So with this new system of allied races, it's likely Blizzard will add many more new races in the future. So with this list, we'll look at 10 of the more likely races to be added to the playable roster. First at number 10, we'll start with the Light Reborn Undead. Kalia Menethil, who was killed by Sylvanas during a meeting between the factions, was then resurrected by the Light, making her into a Light Reborn Undead. She has pale skin, glowing yellow eyes, and is free of rot. And with this, she could lead a small faction of undead like her, humans raised by the Light into a weird version of undeath, as she has recently declined her heir to the throne of Lordaeron. This would be a good way for her to still rule. These undead would obviously be Alliance, a way to rejoin the undead with their families, and to give the undead model to the Alliance. However, while this race during BFA seemed very likely to be added at some point, we are now at the tail end of the expansion, and it has become far less likely. It could still happen sometime in the future though, as we have Kalia in talks with Lillian Voss in patch 8.3 content, so the story threads are there. So with a likely light-based expansion coming at some point, that would be a good time for these Light Reborn Undead to be introduced. Another great part of these undead would be a way to introduce the upright undead stance we have seen on some NPCs, like the orcs getting theirs with the introduction of the Mag'har orcs, as well as more full heads of hair, facial hair, and golden tattoos like those of the Light Fort Draenei, with racials playing into this light theme. Maybe even a far weaker version of the Holy Priest's angelic form, allowing you to cast a few spells that drastically reduce effects after dying, although even this might be a little bit too strong, so maybe something in the similar vein to Uther from Heroes of the Storm, where he stays around as a ghost after dying, but can only use one ability. Working quite well with obvious classes for them: priest, hunters, warriors, rogues, mage, monk, and finally the paladin, as normal undead can't be paladins, and it seems like everyone in the Alliance can be, so it fits. Next, for number 9, we have a race of dragonic might, the Dragonkin, or Dragonborn as some may know them from D&D. This race has been heavily requested since the introduction of the dragon aspects. This race acts as a mix between human and dragon, making them humanoid Dragonkin, standing tall with dragon-like claws, tails, a head, with the body shape of a humanoid. The race already has lots of lore built into it over the years, each flight having different ideals and different objectives in life. The black to protect the planet, the green to protect nature, yada yada yada, with even the possibility to introduce the evil dragon flights, like the chromatic who cause chaos and the infinite who mess with the timelines, to create, well, an infinite army. All of this together builds so much lore possibilities. Dragons are the biggest race in fantasy, and in WoW they have been featured in every single expansion, although with their loss of powers in Cataclysm and Ysera's death, it seemed less and less likely that they would have been added. However, with BFA, we have seen all of the dragonflights resurface. We've even sent help to them, and even helped Wrathion free his flight from N'Zoth's corruption. Soon, possibly a patch in the coming expansions would be a perfect time to add them. Built around their aspects, this race could have some quite cool racials, especially with the possibility for what the factions they have. Upon creating your character, you could choose Horde with red, bronze, or maybe even the chromatic dragonflight, or Alliance with blue, black, or green, since Wrathion and Anduin seem to be very buddy-buddy, allowing each faction to have their own designated flights. Or it could simply be neutral and both factions have access to all the flights. But back to the racials. They could, like the Dragonborn of D&D, have a breath attack cooldown that does a cone of elemental damage, and depending on your flight, could do different types of damage and effects, as well as a base resistance to specific types of damage, again based on your flight. Another racial possibility is that of Dragonic Transformation, where you could change into a dragon for combat purposes, swinging at your enemies and firing off blasts of elemental power. Although since most racials are balanced around only given a 1% boost in power, this might be a little bit too much. So instead, it could simply act as a mount, like that of the Worgen's Running Wild, or the Dragon Wrath legendary staff from Firelands, where you could just turn into a dragon for flight purposes only. Lastly, for choices of classes, if Blizzard went with the specific flights for specific factions, they could also limit off specific classes to each faction to match the flights. But we will simply go based on the idea that the race is neutral and have access to all of the flights. So with that, The obvious are warriors, DKs, and hunters, since all races can be those 3 classes, with them even having the possibility to tame dragons as hunters. Then, since dragons are spellcasters by nature, we could have them being mages, warlocks, and shamans. I've never seen an instance of a dragon using the light in-game, but they should still be able to do those, so let's add in priests and paladins. And lastly, druids, since the green dragonflight is heavily involved with druids, and they could even have dragon-like druid forms, like the Zandalari Dinomancers, allowing for some cool dragon-inspired druid forms. And then throw in monk and rogue because almost everyone can be a monk, and the black dragonflight had a lot of rogues in it. I'm going to get straight to the point for number 8. This race has been heavily requested since its introduction in Wrath of the Lich King, and that of course is the Tuskarr. These walrus wander mostly the lands of Northrend, living almost an Inuit culture. They live off the cold, harsh, frozen landscape of pine and chilled sea. This race could easily be number 1 on this list, if this list was made 10 years ago. But with them only being seen once in a while since then, in singular amounts, they have really fallen out of the limelight. These blubbery beasts could easily have a good list of racials, a bonus to fishing and cooking, damage reduction to frost and fire, like the thick fat ability from Pokemon, which is given to Pokemon like Snorlax, and reduces the damage of fire and ice moves by 50%, although we'd probably have to cut that down to 1% each to keep in line with other racials. They could even give them a bonus to leatherworking and skinning, as they are usually seen in thick hide huts and houses, while also wearing armor made of such. Or lastly, something to do with their traveling turtle trading caravans. Although the Tuskarr are not just survivors and traders, they are powerful fighters, with connection to the spirits. This could easily allow them to be monks, shamans, and mages, while their general living gives them access to hunter and warrior. And yet again, another race that has interesting potential for druids. Thick, chubby forms covered in thick hide and blubber with large downward tusks and thick fur. A polar bear form, a frozen tree form. This tribal nature and survival of the difficult wilds would give them a great home in the Horde, especially with their connection to the elements and spirits, to pair with the orcs, trolls, and tauren. Although being traders, they do have the potential to be a neutral race like the Pandaren, and if introduced as an allied race, this could probably make the most sense. And at number 7, we have our first feathery race in the Arakoa. This race was first seen in the Burning Crusade, and in large amounts too, and they were once again seen in Warlords of Draenor. We have seen both of them, the once strong and mighty, tall, powerful zealots, able to soar the skies as nimble hunters, however falling and becoming cursed in the blood of Seath, malformed and ground-stricken, losing their once glorious kingdom to madness. This race has many options. The first possibility is to give them the option to choose corrupted or uncorrupted, giving you different choices of classes from warrior, hunter, rogue, shaman, priest, warlock, and an avian-based druid. Your class choices being locked to corrupted or uncorrupted. But the most likely and most interesting is just to give the corrupted to Horde, fitting in with the races that surpassed and dealt with their corruption, while the uncorrupted join the alliance with the other proud and noble races. Or the third option could just be a simple cosmetic thing, like the orc postures, and be given to a single faction, most likely the Horde. This race has been heavily requested since its introduction in the Burning Crusade, only increased by its reappearance in Warlords of Draenor. At one point, before Warlords of Draenor's announcement, some very well done concept art of female and male uncorrupted Arakoa and female and male ogre showed up, but were then later deleted. Only passing references to them seem to exist now, possibly this being a race that was planned early in Warlords of Draenor, but had to be cut, like most of everything else in that expansion. These birds could have many interesting racials, a flight form mount like the Worgens run wild, or possibly a glide using their wings, similar to the Zandalari racial, a haste buff, either a proc or permanent one from their connection to the winds, and lastly, maybe even a double jump, as they would have wings, much like the demon hunters who can also double jump, which would probably make this the most popular race to play for whatever class you wanted. Next, we have one of, if not the most recognizable and marketable race in the entire franchise, for almost 2 decades now. This race became the butt end of many jokes on what races could be added to the game, but at the end of the day, it really could and should be added. And that is, of course, the Murloc. These fishy gremlins originated from an ancient frog, which was most likely Kragwa that we see in Battle for Azeroth. The Murlocs are seen to use many classes in-game, donning armor and weapons, including the Hunter, Priest, Mage, Warrior, Rogue, Shaman, and even Paladins. We also seen on the Broken Shore, many were brought into the Legion, turning them dark green and black, and becoming Warlocks. But even more interesting is Murgolis, a Murloc demon hunter who assists you in fighting these fel-corrupted Murlocs, growing wings, horns, and fel power. This race would really not be too much of a stretch. They have massive potential, even if they have an odd shape. They can wear armor, and with races like Tauren and Worgen already messing up helmets, the Murloc would not be that much of a stretch. Those that would be playable would most likely be ones raised by King Murgle, a man who started researching the Murlocs long ago, working to free them and socialize them. With our help and the help of Murky, he has begun to make a faction of Murlocs friendly to players. And they have been shown to be able to reach great intellect. Sir Finley Murgleton, a member of the League of Explorers, is able to speak Common, and quite well too. Pair this with Murlocs in the past who have been seen speaking Common, and their own language actually being one that can be translated, as it's not a simple language like the animals of nature. They have the possibility to be added to the game. Now the question is though, which faction? Well, they have been a plague to both factions, tormenting ponds, oceans, lakes, rivers, coastlines, and even deep into the ocean abyss. So, which faction would they join? Well, I think Horde, simply as their general nature and culture fits more with the Horde. I could see Murlocs walking around Orgrimmar, but not around Stormwind. Which is probably why, in a scrapped expansion idea from Blizzard, they had Garrosh recruit Murlocs into his mongrel horde. Some racial options for these guys could be they gain a speed buff when they're low on HP, to simulate the infamy of Murlocs getting players killed by running away and pulling other Murlocs when they get low on health, as well as a damage boost when near other Murlocs or just other party members, and just a general buff when near/in water. Infinite water breathing paired with a swim speed boost, both on the same level of power as the Unending Breath from Warlocks. And at number 5, we have the Tortollan. This turtle race was hinted at in the lore long ago with the Lore of the Ancients, but were first seen in Hearthstone, then later being added to WoW like a fair few other things from Hearthstone. These shelled shorties have become quite popular since their introduction with their unique appearance, attitude, and potential. Their popularity no doubt pushed by the "a turtle made it to the water" meme that grew in the community, featuring some pretty amazing voice acting work.
A turtle made it to the water!
Standing on the ocean shores to defend the natures of the sea, defending young turtles, and even getting you to help kill them, the Tortollan care a lot about the balance of the oceans and nature. Showing their connection to the tribal world, they stick to only the most basic classes: warriors, shamans, hunters, monks, and possibly priests. And of course DK, since everyone can be a DK. We could even see them maybe as druids. Their forms turtle-like, covered in shells, based on their aquatic nature, playing into turtle, tortoise, and the sea. With this tribal nature, I would likely see them join the Horde. Or we could have our first neutral allied race, these being the ones brought in by the Pandaren, while smooth shell Tortollan could join the Alliance, spiked shell Tortollan could join the Horde, giving everyone access to heroes and half shells. Racials for the Tortollan would be obvious: a defensive bonus to any attacks coming from behind, a cooldown to curl up in their shells and spin while moving, knocking people back and taking less damage in the process, a fishing bonus, maybe even a swim speed buff with increased underwater breathing, or maybe even the baseline ability to block attacks. Who knows? Next at number 4, we have another skilled race, the Sethrak. A snake race born out of BFA, these tall lanky creatures are descendants of a great snake, roaming the lands of Vol'dun. Although many are hostile, there are still those who ally themselves with the factions. This race is quite popular because of its unique appearance and being a possibility for the first scaled race added to the game. Although because of their past with the Sethrak enslaving the Volpera, I could see them being put onto the Alliance side. The Sethrak are visibly using many different classes in-game, so we already have a pretty set classes with Shaman, Rogue, Hunter, Warrior, DK, and Mage. Although on top of that, we can also add another Druid class to this list. Pile on snake-like Druid forms, much like the Dinomancers of the Zandalari. An example feral form could be a mix of feline and snake, like the Jagras from Monster Hunter. Racial-wise, they could have some simple nature and maybe fire resistance. a bite attack that they could use to apply a poisonous dot, or a short duration CC, a buff to nearby allies as they use their commanding presence, maybe even to summoned pets, and bonus damage against elementals and Vulpera. Now on to the final 3. These were all the top picks of a few polls I ran. These 3 races are the oldest and most asked for we can think of, and those that make the most sense. So on to the first one with the Ogre. This race of single or double-headed brutes have been part of the Horde since day 1, coming with them from Draenor. It's quite a surprise as they are the only original Horde race that's not playable. Even goblins got in the game before them. With the recent addition of the Kultaran race, a mix of tall, beefy, and chubby, this skeleton would be the perfect skeleton to introduce ogres in. There is still a trouble of their size, being in lore much larger than normal, but that didn't stop the Tauren, who were supposed to be just as big. So they could introduce the Mach Nathal, a race of half-orc, half-ogres, and could be led by the famous Rexxar. But they may be a bit too close to orcs to fill the ogre role people want. The ogre being able to have dual heads is a very interesting concept. While in games like Heroes of the Storm, you have a 2-headed ogre named Cho'Gall, where Cho controls the movement and melee attacks, while Gall, the other head, simply controls the spells and buffs they cast on themselves. But while this 2 players controlling one character concept works in a MOBA like Heroes of the Storm, it simply would not work in a forever online MMORPG like WoW, even if the concept would be amazing, so likely being 1-headed or 2-headed would simply be cosmetic, or 1-headed would be melee classes and 2-headed would be casters, like they are in lore, or they could play into the racials of this more. Say, you choose to be a warlock, for example. You could then choose a melee class for what the other head that controls the body will be, which would then give you a set of racials based on which melee class you chose. So, if you chose a warrior flavor, for example, you could probably gain some basic melee attacks that don't hit harder than a normal filler spell would, so it doesn't break any kind of racial balance. And you could probably have something like a charge or a shield block racial. Or if you chose a rogue subclass, you could maybe stealth on a short cooldown, similar to Shadow Meld, gain the ability to pick pockets, garrote, or even Shadow Step. Or on the opposite side of the spectrum, if you chose warrior as your main class, the other head could give you some spells as your racials, like a mage head that gives you access to food, drinks, a low-hitting frostbolt, and maybe even a portal or 2. Now, all of this seems incredibly difficult to balance, so it kind of makes sense if they just give them normal racials, maybe similar to the Tauren, where they have increased health and defenses, and then maybe some kind of CC on a long cooldown. So for a list of classes they could be, I would love to say no to being a hunter, simply because of their size. So more brutish classes, like warriors, monk, death knights, and rogues, like the amazing Dag, the best rogue ever. Then for caster classes, warlocks, mages, and shamans. Now at number 2, we have our final aquatic race, the Naga. These creatures were first seen summoned from the depths of the ocean by Illidan in Warcraft 3. The males are brutish and powerful, the females regal and brimming with magical prowess. Once elves, they were turned into these beasts by a deal made between their leader Azshara and N'Zoth. And with both of these enemies dealt with, it seems like there could be an opening. We have seen many of these already leave the servitude of Azshara, those under Illidan and Lady Vashj. The demon hunters summoning and allying with them in Legion, as we foolishly saw them as enemies in the Burning Crusade. Now, I know what some of you may be saying. First, how would they mount with that tail of theirs? Well, side saddle, of course, something women used to do in the older times, where if they tried to ride a horse normally, they would ride up their dress. This too would work for Naga, letting their tail go off to one side, then wrap around and lay back over. Next comes the issue of boots and legs. Well, races like Trolls, Tauren, Worgen, and Draenei all butcher boots, and the Mecha Gnomes butchering boots, legs, gloves, and bracers. Having the Naga only unable to visually see boots would be no big deal, as legs could easily be applied to them, almost like a sock. This race already has an insane amount of customization to it in-game, with genders, colors, fin styles, how many arms for the females, accessories. They even have Fel variants that turn them green and black. The racials could easily be along the lines of simply extra damage, swim speed, aquatic breathing, a slithery speed boost, maybe even a bubble shield to absorb damage. Its range of classes could be pretty much all of them except druids and monks, since they can't kick. So, rogues, warriors, mages, priests, warlocks, shamans, hunters, DKs, And they could maybe even be demon hunters, because of their allyship with the Illidari, and their work with said demon hunters. Possibly joining the Alliance, elves that were tricked into servitude, believing their queen could do no wrong, learning to tame their corruption like the Worgen once did with the help of the Night Elves. Last, and certainly not least, we have the Ethereal race, a race that has been in the front line for many expansions and has been a heavily requested race since the Burning Crusade, all the way up till recently being alongside us at the end of Legion, while running the transmog competition and taking control of the Brawlers Guild to gather information on us. These creatures were once like all others, made of flesh, until the Void Lord Dementius destroyed their planets, transforming them into these creatures of magic and bandages. This race was the most voted for in the poll we ran to find out which races people wanted the most, and this one was top for good reasons. With such a unique appearance, interesting lore, and capability of customization and cool racials, and a few famous figures like Locust Walker and Arc Thief Rapham, a major figure in 5 Hearthstone expansions. Customizations has tons of options with energy color, bandage color, adornments, and accessories. Racial-wise, a fair few of the obvious choices are already taken by the Void Elves, so simple variants of theirs would work great. A slight alteration of some of the other racials in the game, Ethereals could summon Void Pillars that allow transmogrify, void storage, and other services provided by Ethereals, whatever they may be going forward. They could also use their Ethereal Shift, increasing their speed and their dodge for a few moments as they phase partially out of reality, slipping away. A short-range Teleport would also work nicely, as well as a general buff to agility and intellect, or allowing all of their attacks to do a small bit of void damage. For obvious reasons, the Ethereals have a large connection to the Void, and while many are evil, many are not an ally with us, including the followers of Locust Walker, who are heavily in favor of the Void Elves and the Alliance side. So with that, I would put the Ethereals in the Alliance. Locust Walker being the teacher of Illyria Windrunner, the leader of the Void Elves, this makes it a perfect connection to bring the Ethereals in. Bringing in more Void races into a faction built around the light at its basic level adds a quite interesting theme to it, a balance between Void and Light. Lastly, I could see them having many different classes, as we've seen them use many different classes in-game. So rogues, warriors, hunters, mages, priests, warlocks, and the possibility of demon hunters with their connection to energy and power. Although I'm not sure if they could be Death Knights or not, since who knows if they can be even raised into undeath. Alright, and that's the end of the video. If there's any allied races you think that we missed, and you want to see added to the game, or if you have any ideas you wish to add to the ones we listed, like possible racials and class customization options, I'd love to hear about them down in the comments. Especially possible racial abilities, as those were kinda tough to come up with. This video was edited by my editor Felplague. Links to his channel and Twitter will be in the video description if you wish to tell him how much you like this video, or have ideas for future videos just like this one.